Hey everybody, welcome once again to Manga Mondays, the only manga review show where you'll get to see the sun slowly set on me and the lighting shift as the day wears on into evening. Probably no helicopter noise today, haven't heard any helicopters, so we might be out of the helicopter woods, at least for now. Today I'm going to be doing a very special review of a one-volume complete story, A Girl on the Shore by Inio Asano, who is a very popular manga author, very critically acclaimed manga author, best known for Oyasumi Punpun, Solanin, Nijigahara Holograph, all very critically acclaimed stories that people have wanted me to read for a long time. But of course, when I was at the store deciding which manga I should buy, I thought, why don't I buy the one that I've never heard anyone talk about, that is described on the back as one of his most challenging works yet. So of course I had to go for that one. I don't know how much I'd say this is challenging in terms of being difficult to understand or follow. It may be challenging if you don't want to watch 14-year-olds have sex a lot. This is probably the most sexually explicit non-pornographic manga I've ever read. It is pretty much about the sex life of a 14-year-old girl and the boy that she starts having lots of sex with. And, you see tons and tons and tons of graphic sex in this book. I'm afraid to try to, flip through and just show you random pages because I don't want to end up, accidentally showing you some hardcore stuff that I probably couldn't get away with showing on a YouTube video. It's all uncensored, it's in great detail, and the characters are very realistically drawn, so it feels pretty real. Now, the story itself is basically about a 14-year-old girl who's not really sure what she wants out of life. She lives in a really small town. She is a very sexual person, and she wants to fuck a hot guy who she likes. Basically, her goal seems to be, I want to fuck this hot guy. But the hot guy is just a shallow asshole who doesn't really pay attention to her. So she starts fucking this other kid who really likes her, but she doesn't really like him. So she basically starts using him for sex. And as the story goes along, it very quickly becomes apparent that she's developing some kind of feelings for him, but she doesn't want to admit them to herself. She's not really sure what she wants out of life besides the sex. And he, on the other hand, is extremely depressed and traumatized and suicidal. And, is fully aware, basically he's constantly criticizing her for the fact that she's abusing her power in the fact that he likes her, and that's why he's willing to have sex with her, even though, he can't get what he really wants out of the relationship. He wants to actually be a couple with her, but she won't let him have it. And it's sort of the story of her taking, it's sort of a question of, will she recognize her feelings for him in time for him to reconcile them before he, goes through his own sort of arc? I've probably said too much and spoiled this, but, if that sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and give this a read. It's a very sort of atmospheric, slow-moving story that is very small and personal. It's really just about these characters and their hang-ups. There's a lot of panels of characters just sort of staring off into space thinking about things. It's very introspective and not very forward with its emotions, except when characters are actually explaining them to one another. And there's a lot of sort of scene setting. There's lots of characters just in classrooms talking about music or anime and stuff like that. Lots of just kind of getting you into the heads of these characters and sort of bringing the world to life is a very important element of this. I would really compare this. It feels very cinematic. The span of this, the time it takes to read it, is probably that of about a film. And it's sort of paced like one. If you're interested in mumblecore kind of movies, this is that kind of thing. Just a very quaint, small story that tries to make realistic characters with realistic dialogue, even realistic diction. The characters all, it goes out of its way to have them talk naturally and have like really natural feeling conversations. None of it feels like dialogue as much as it just feels like real text, except for in certain scenes. I mean, the most interesting thing about it really is the approach to sex and sexuality of very young characters. You know, they're in middle school, and it's just a way that like feels so much more real than what you get out of manga most of the time, where sex is like this really bizarre, chaste, like every with manga it's always like this weird combination of characters who feel incredibly chaste and yet are presented incredibly sexually, which is really bizarre. This is just realistic. Like, it's not really one way or the other. A lot of the sex in this is not even really gratifying, certainly not for the reader, and sometimes not even for the characters. And even when it is gratifying for the characters, it's the way it's drawn just looks like real sex. It's just kind of sloppy and unkempt, and its body's tangled together and flesh everywhere. You know, it doesn't try to like hypersexualize anything. Not to say that none of it is ever like gratifying at all. There's one bit where there's like a fucking really long continuous sex scene that like, you know, just seems like, yeah, this seems like what I'd like to be doing, you know, having this much sex. It looks like a lot of fun, but it's definitely not intended to be pornographic or for you to get off on it, which is the only reason I can imagine that this got published in the US. And I talked about this in my Insomnia Analysis 3 video, that Vertical Comics, who, if you've seen my video on Enclosed called Fat, I accuse them of being very pretentious, that they try to sort of present all the manga they release as being like high class and like something really special, you know, sequential art for mature readers and all that. And on the one hand, I really hate that. And I hate that that's necessary, but in a way, I think that's why they're able to publish this, because this is a graphic sex book about underage kids, you know. And even though I think, personally, that this is... I don't make that much of a distinction between this and porn in terms of which one's more artistic or which one's more meaningful or which one, like, you know, is or isn't something that people should be looking at or whatever. Like, I've seen pornographic stories that are gratifying, that are meant to be sexual, you know, for the audience, that still tell good stories, or even just the sex itself is good, you know, like sex is a part of life. It's a part of human nature. It's something that I think should be represented in art. And I find it really kind of insulting that like it feels as though the only reason this can get away with being called like high art is because the sex is often not gratifying and it's drawn realistically and it's not drawn in a way to be satisfying for the audience, even though I don't think that drawing sex that way is like a bad thing, or that it's like somehow less artistic. Like we would not say that anything that's not perfectly realistic is therefore not art, you know. Like, you're just expressing what sex means to you in a way that happens to be gratifying or idealized for the audience. You know, idealization does not mean not art. And so, yeah, it's sad to me that we can only get something like this if it is hyper real, you know, if it seems highbrow, if it seems like it has a deeper message other than just the sex, and if it's being published by Vertical Comics, who are willing to, you know, to go, but this is high art, you know. And granted, it is artistic, you know. I completely agree that it has interesting things to say about sex and about sexuality, and about the sexuality of young people, you know. But I kind of lament that it has to be this way, that it has to be presented as, you know, as challenging and bold in order for a sexual manga to be published. But at the same time, I'm glad we at least got it. I'm glad that this could be published in English, because it's kind of shocking that it can. You know, I've seen cases of stories that can't be published in English because they feature, you know, these kinds of sexuality between younger characters and stuff like that, even if it is interesting. So, you know, I'm glad that Inio Asano has such clout that they can publish something, because, you know, the fact of the matter is that 14-year-olds do have sex in this world, and they do have complicated, interesting feelings about it that are relatable and interesting to think about. You know, they can be challenging to think about, but nonetheless, it's a part of our world that I don't see reflected in manga. And it kind of drives me insane that like most manga that I read is like romantic between characters even older than these ones, and sex is like such a taboo topic between them that they won't even address it, even though the whole art style is hypersexualized. And I'm really going to get into this when I talk about the next manga that I think I'm going to be covering on this show. I don't know if it'll be the next one, but it'll be soon, because there's a manga I've been reading lately that really exemplifies my problems with how sex is handled in manga, and this felt like this was such a breath of fresh air compared to that. To just see characters who just, like, you know, to see a story that presents sex as a normal thing that actually happens, and be like, yeah, this is what is actually, like, this is normal and real in the world. You know, the story itself it's a sad kind of story. I would only recommend this if you want to read something very melancholy, that's very much about emotions, and it sort of becomes more plot focused in the second half. It develops more of the first half of it is very meandering. It's mostly just these characters sort of like getting into their heads and exploring what they're doing together, and the way that they sort of bounce off of each other emotionally. Whereas the second half really develops like a plot, and furthers the characters and their arcs. And the way it ends is sort of ambivalent, and the whole thing is really pretty. I would say ambivalence is the emotion this is going for. So overall, I enjoyed it. It's not the kind of story that I think would stick with me in a really major way. Like I think the thing that makes it stand out the most is just how much sex there is, and how graphically it's depicted, and how it's not shied away from at all, which even in non-anime or manga mediums is pretty rare, you know, to see a story that just goes all in on exploring sexuality. But it's not that it says anything so deeply interesting or resonant that it's like, wow, that's the most artistic thing I've ever seen. It's a good manga. If you like Inio Asano, well, I don't know. I haven't read any of his other stuff, so I don't know how this compares or stacks up or anything like that. It's definitely not his most popular work. Perhaps it is indeed his most challenging, but I overall had a good time with it, and I'm glad I got to read something so different from what I'm used to. Oh, and that's it for this episode of Manga Monday.